The unique life of a ranger. Few people have had the privilege of living on an isolated nature reserve of international importance. Their every move judged by countless critics. Young ranger Ajay Tegala embarking on his placement at Blakeney Point, aged just 19, would have to stand firm in the face of many challenges to protect the wildlife of one of Britain's prime nature sites. It has been put down in a book called The Unique Life of a Ranger by Ajay Tegala. Delighted to be joining me live on the line from somewhere in the UK. Ajay himself. Ajay, good morning to you.
Good morning, Giles.
Whereabouts are you, by the way, this morning? Where do we find you this morning? Are you on some sort of outlooking sort of the wilderness? Are you in a duck sanctuary? Where are you, Ajay?
I'm kind of in the middle of nowhere, actually. I'm in the flat fens of Cambridgeshire. I'm not far from the Norfolk border. So I'm in the flat agricultural landscape of rural England. So it's quite nice and it's very sunny.
Yes. Well, we could talk about the sunshine and the environment for the rest of the day if we need to about that one. Explain a little bit about what if for those who don't know the fascinating environment and wilderness of the UK. Because we don't really think about the UK as wilderness, do we? But there are some huge areas that are relatively untouched by man.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, so much of the land inland is obviously touched by man in many ways, but the coast is the closest to wilderness we've got because it is shaped by the sea. So I was stationed out as a ranger on Blakeney Point, which is a shingle spit, which is like a long beach, basically, that's been deposited by the sea, carrying these stones and dropping them, and then every tide kind of shifts them around. So it's quite a harsh landscape, but it is wild because it's shaped by nature rather than man. And then some special plants and animals make their home there.
And what was your job as a ranger? If we say you're a ranger, I immediately think, in a 4x4 with a gun rack on the back and a walkie-talkie and perhaps a Stetson on your head. I don't see that's perhaps the harsh reality, but anyway.
That's part of it. Yeah, there are Land Rovers involved. There's also boats involved on Blakeney Point because it's surrounded by sea. And so the job of a ranger really is to safeguard the wildlife. So basically ground nesting birds like terns that are a bit like gulls that migrate from Africa, lots of small birds that lay their eggs on the shingle, which is very clever because it means they're camouflaged so potential predators don't see the eggs. But of course, potential visitors could accidentally trample on them. So as a ranger in the summertime, we're there keeping an eye on the nesting birds and monitoring them, but also engaging with people to, politely say, watch your step, but also to kind of make them appreciate what's around them because it is a very special place. And it's so easy, if you're a bird watcher, it's so easy to miss things. But if you take that time to watch carefully, you can actually be rewarded with the most wonderful wildlife spectacles.
So how did you, if you like, get into this? What was your interest in wildlife, in the environment? How was it, was it watching sort of programs on the TV? Was it a visit to, the RSPCC's centre in the UK? How did it sort of nurture?
Yeah, it was both of those things, actually. It probably started, I guess, feeding the ducks on the river when I was a toddler. And, liking being outside, liking seeing birds, looking through a bird book and wanting to see all the different amazing, colourful and brown species in there. And so, yeah, seeing stuff on television, of course, the great David Attenborough is such an amazing man and so many wonderful programmes. So a mixture between experiencing it for real and seeing it on TV. And then I did work experience when I was about 15 on a nature reserve. And the wardens and rangers that I worked with there, they said they love their job because they're making a difference for the planet in the work that they do, but also they look forward to Monday mornings. They kind of get paid, not very much, but they get paid to enjoy themselves. And I was a teenager looking at what I wanted to do. And I thought, I want to be outside. I don't want to be stuck in an office. I want to be out there working with wildlife. Sign me up.
So, I mean, what sort of training do you have to undergo for that sort of thing? Because, you don't just turn up one day at the gates and say, hello, I've come to look after the wildlife. I mean, it's a bit more involved than that, surely.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So it was a long journey, really. I did a qualification in countryside management, and also I did lots of volunteering because it's quite a competitive thing because lots of people want to do it. So the more experience you can get, the more people you can get to know, that really helped. And also getting to know, being able to tell an oak tree from a beech tree and things like that, getting to know my wildlife. So I did a lot of that, a lot of volunteering. Then I got a seasonal job, and then I got another seasonal job. And eventually I was able to, sort of wind my way into the National Trust and become Blakeney Point Ranger.
At 19, I mean, it does seem quite young because most teenagers, you wouldn't sort of leave in charge of the house for the weekend. Never mind an important nature reserve in the UK.
Yeah, there was quite a handover. So I started at 19, but it was a few years later that I was in charge, as it were. And in that time, I soaked up a lot of knowledge from people, because I grew up inland, but I was working with people that had lived their whole lives on the coast. So they knew the rhythms of the tides. They knew where to go in the boat, where not to go. And little tips like I was told all good rangers carry a knife when they're out in a boat, because you never know if you're going to get rope from a mooring tangled around your propeller and you end up in trouble. So it's like being a scout, really. You've always got to be prepared.
It's not just sort of terns and migrating birds. Is it? There's sort of seals and stuff off the coast as well.
That's right. They're the real stars of the show. I mean, in terms of conservation and important wildlife, the birds are probably the most important thing. But I mean, who doesn't love a cute seal pup? And I think a lot of people in Britain don't realise that we've got seals around. The largest sea mammal around the UK, the grey seal, they were shot by fishermen years ago, so numbers were low. But then as we got closer to the 21st century, they started to make a comeback because they weren't being shot anymore. People realized they weren't actually a threat to fishermen. They were lovely animals. And so basically in my time, I think we had about a few hundred when I started having their pups in the winter, because they have their pups on the beach out in the winter time. And so, that seemed like the most amazing number. And then by the time, a few years had passed, there were 3,000 plus pups being born on a 2-mile stretch of beach. So what a spectacle, what a sight, what a sound, and what a smell, I've got to tell
you. Yes, indeed. It makes me wonder because with something like the seal population coming back to 3,000 pups being born on the beach, and yes, being a clothes peg for your nose when you approach them. But the other thing is the fact that what does that do? Because environment and ecosystems are fragile things. We know this now. We're lucky enough to have most of the population educated to know that you can't just sort of dump sewage straight into the sea and the whole thing. But on the other hand, if you release seals, I mean, seals don't they eat stuff. And that's going to anything that that has a boom in its procreation, in its numbers. It's going to have a knock-on effect, surely, for the rest of the ecosystem within the park itself or within the area itself.
Yes, that's very true. And a few people have been a bit nervous about these seals increasing in numbers because it is an unknown. Because they've gone from hardly any to loads and loads, and that's a lot of kilograms of blubber on the beach. It's a lot of kilograms of fish that they're eating in the sea. But we know, because they've been satellite tagged, that although we see them pupping on our small bit of the coast, they're actually really wide-ranging, and they swim all the way across to the Netherlands. They think nothing of that. Basically, their home is the whole of that part of the North Sea. So although we see them in a localized spot, in the course of the year, they follow the food, they go miles and miles. And so they're spread out. And they're also, they're natural. They're part of the natural landscape. Yes, they're the top of the food chain, but in other places you've got sharks. And who knows, it might only be a matter of time before the nearest shark populations latch onto this food source of these seals and start to move in, especially with changing sea temperatures.
Yeah, indeed. As we get warmer, we're starting to see sort of species migrate from warmer climates that we wouldn't have seen before as well. That's another one of these situations that we're looking at. I mean, you're at the sharp end, and even with something. I mean, because a lot of people don't have, if you like, won't have the idea that even the slightest temperature change can have a massive effect, not just on seals, on fish populations, but on those bird populations that feed off, obviously, that they use the sea as their feeding grounds, and something like terns, a slight range in a slight increase in temperature will have a knock-on effect on their breeding habits and so forth.
Yeah, that's totally right. They're so closely linked, the whole food chains. And something changes at the bottom, like you say, a few degrees change in temperature, the fish changes range. And this causes problems because for the terns, there's so little habitat available for them. They like remote bits of beach which have the right sort of shingle and sand mixture and aren't disturbed. They're very sensitive to disturbance by other animals, by people. So they've got all these pressures that you mentioned with changing temperatures, changing weather, battling with the tides, battling with the weather, the elements, and the prey availability. And then on top of that, not much habitat. And then on top of that, potentially disturbance. So yeah, it can be quite a rocky road as a ranger. You see these moments of jeopardy.
How do you sort of balance them? Because it's great that people get involved and are interested and want to see wildlife. And, there have been so many, everybody got sort of suddenly, if they weren't turned on, and I'm a little bit older, so I got first turned onto the planet with Life on Earth, Attenborough in the 70s. And every couple of years he brings out a new one and everybody goes, that's amazing. Because the thing about the environment, it continues to amaze and astonish us. And then people want to get out and experience it. But I suppose you have to explain to people in the nicest possible way that nature isn't a theme park. It doesn't open on times it should do. It's not touchy-feeling. It's not an immersive experience. You can't pet the seals and you can't go and sort of tickle a turn, I suppose, as for you, a word of a phrase.
Yeah, that's totally right. And actually, you mentioned David Attenborough. He has a great quote about people won't want to protect what they haven't experienced. So people need to care about wildlife. And in order to care about it, you have to kind of appreciate it to know how wonderful it is. So you're right. Being a ranger, really, in a nutshell, is that balance between welcoming people and giving them those moments of inspiration, but also sowing those seeds, especially with young people. That's a constant process. Each year, new people coming and visiting. It's about exciting them about it. But yes, it is educating as well. It is exactly as you say. It's getting them to admire them from a distance, not do anything. I mean, even like flying a kite on a beach might seem like an innocent thing, but a tern nesting, seeing a kite being flown might think it's a bird of prey about to predate it, about to take it. So it's things that you don't always think about. Sometimes we're like killjoys, like the beach police stopping people's fun. But we hope that we always spread messages. And of course, through social media, through these wildlife programs, I think awareness is growing, but it's a message that constantly needs to be continued to be spread.
And I mean, how much pressure did you feel as a teenager then doing this? Because I mean, obviously people would have been looking at you, and like I said, if you do, if you do disturb a nesting bird, then it doesn't go, oh, it's okay, I'll come back tomorrow. I mean, they tend to take off and not come back for a while, or the eggs get damaged, or they get crushed. So there is people might think it's all sitting outside with some mug or something steaming and contemplating the universe in your navel. But actually, if you do get it wrong and you do upset something, then it does have a knock-on effect.
Yeah, it is a big responsibility. Yeah, absolutely. And the locals and the local people there, they're kind of always watching your every move because they've lived there all their life, and they judge your success on the success of the wildlife. And sometimes there might be things that are out of your control that you just can't help, and you have to live with it. And that is really tough. Other times they do have a good season. You get that really warm feeling of seeing the young fledge and knowing that you helped to play a part in that. And that's what motivates you. But you have to see things in context. These terns, for example, are very long-lived birds. So they're going to have some years where their young don't fledge, but then maybe the next year or the year after. But we've got to do all we can to help that. So yeah, constantly being criticized. Everybody's got an opinion, but it's great that that people care.
You mentioned the fact that people social media, watching TV, watching on their devices, whatever, and then you mentioned about you're tracking seals and very quick working. I think they go for sort of sneaky weekends in Amsterdam or Holland or whatever, in a manner of speaking. How much technology is there involved in on what seemingly it's a large bit of shingle? You would think, okay, we just have to go up and down occasionally, not tread on anything with a clipboard. But that's probably very, very far from the truth, AJ. How much technology is involved in the monitoring, and so that you can manage and predict what the populations are going to be?
Well, when the reserve started over 100 years ago, it was very basic. But now there is a lot of technology involved because it makes life a lot easier. It gives us that more in-depth detail that helps us do a better job. So one of the things I remember seeing coming in was these trail cameras, the camera traps that a lot of people put in their gardens, and they find that they've got badgers or hedgehogs in their gardens. We use them to see what was around. And we even did find a hedgehog eating birds' eggs on the beach, which was quite a surprise. And of course, we'd never have known if we hadn't had that camera out there. So it showed us, some of the extra challenges that were going on behind the scenes. Owls coming down and taking the eggs as well. So it basically answers the questions. You see an egg has been eaten, what by? Oh, the camera has showed us. And that helps us tweak our management to say, right, okay, can we do things differently to make it more favorable for the birds and perhaps discourage this particular predator? And then, of course, we've got night vision stuff coming out as well. So keeping an eye out when we had rats around, using that technology to see where they were. And then now some of the sophisticated bait stations, because obviously we can't have rats living there because they'll munch all the eggs, but we can be as efficient as we can through technology. So it's constantly improving.
How much
you get alerts to your phone?
How much? Yes, yeah, I can imagine that's an interesting app. How much is it though? Because nature, red in tooth and claw. So how much is it a balance between protecting certain species and then, if you like, letting nature have its course?
We try to let nature take its course as much as possible. So we don't do any practical management. Like in some places, they cut down trees in certain places to encourage certain plants or put grazing animals on. None of that is done because the landscape itself is shaped by the sea. So it's truly wild as much as we can, shaped by natural processes. But the one exception is the fact that because it is so rare and it is so precious, we have to make sure that the rare wildlife, the little terns, the ring plovers, these birds that have declined so much in just a short space of time, that we do the best for those. And so that's why we intervene with predator control, the rats that I mentioned, for example. And even things like we have fence lines around some of the enclosures, putting jagged bottle tops on top so that you don't get kestrels and birds of prey landing and picking off the eggs. So little things like that. But basically, yeah, it's helping those birds as much as possible. But then otherwise, I mean, the seals, all we do is make sure people keep dogs out of their way, mainly for the safety of dogs, actually, because if you had a seal and a dog in a confrontation, my money's on the seal coming out on top, I think.
Right. Okay. So why the book then? Why did you decide to put this all down, in a book?
Well, I always get asked, what's it like? What's your job like? And it's hard to say it in a sentence, really. And I felt that I was asked that so many times. And there is so many stories. While I was there, you experience things and, it's just daily life for us. But actually living in a remote spot where you only get off to get to your shopping once a week, you have to be organized. You get all sorts of wildlife arriving. You see the migrations coming in the spring and the autumn. It is quite a unique life. And, I've learned a lot from a lot of people. I've seen lots of wonderful things. We kept a blog while we were out there, living out there in the summer. So I got into wildlife writing. And then, of course, with the lockdown, like everybody, it was a worrying time, but it was a time where we had a bit more time on our hands. And I just sort of looked back and looked at some diary entries, and I got into writing it in a caravan and started. And I thought, this is a cathartic process for me, because it felt like those experiences were now captured. And I could tell my parents, actually, this is what it was like. Now you can read this book and you can understand what it was really like. And hopefully people will love it that bit more and want to enjoy wildlife on their doorsteps even more.
I'm particularly lucky because I live overlooking a reservoir. My house is literally 3 miles from anywhere else, and I have national park coming onto the reservoir. So I get this tremendous variety of Spanish wildlife from boar to eagle to otter outside my front door. And people always say when they come to my place, because I'm off grid as well, and they say, well, what do you do? And I just say, well, I just sit on my terrace and watch. And they can't get their heads around the being still and just observing and how rewarding that can be. Presumably, AJ, I mean, you would recommend that for, not come to my house, but you would recommend that everybody gets out and just not stomps around, but just sits and there is a cathartic experience in there to actually sitting, in the grand scheme of things.
Totally. Yeah. It's like you said earlier, people can't expect to just see everything on a plate. You can't just walk out your door and there's an otter, playing with its young. Patience. And it's about relaxing into it. If you're tense and thinking, well, I've been here 5 minutes, I've not seen anything, you're not going to enjoy it. So, kind of see it as mindfulness is a big thing now. People relaxing outside to relax and restore themselves, enjoy feeling the breeze around you. But relaxing, watching, and then, things start to appear. So patience is really important. But definitely an advocate for that, even if it's in your own garden with a bird feeder.
Well, exactly. You don't need acres of wilderness, do you? Because it can literally, if you observe long enough, you'll see quite a few things, and birds coming in, obviously.
Yeah, exactly. And now, even if you don't have a garden, you can log on to webcams where you've got peregrine falcon nests on your local cathedral and things like that. There's a lot more things online where you can follow the progress of nesting birds and get that really privileged view through technology again. So there's so many ways to enjoy wildlife, but you can't beat just walking outside and appreciating what's around you.
And just looking where you tread as well. The book is called The Unique Life of a Ranger. It's by Ajay Tegala. Tegala, who is speaking to you today. AJ, if people want to find you or more about the book, where can they find you on the socials and the web?
I do all of the social media channels. I've got a healthy obsession with Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. It's all my name, Ajay Tegala. And, if you want to support local bookshops, then that's always great as well.
And the book will be available as a download as well from our own virtual bookstore. The book is called The Unique Life of a Ranger. It's by Ajay Tegala. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, Giles. It's been a pleasure.